Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's tutorial. Today we want to look at the eye. But bear in mind that the eye is not the only component of the visual system. But in addition, we also have an important nerve known as the optic nerve, that's the cranial nerve too, as well as the optic centers, which are found in the occipital lobe of the brain. Remember that before we look at the substance of the eye is going to bear what we call these eyelids. We have the superior eyelid, the inferior eyelid, and they are going to bear actually eyelashes. These eyelashes, yes, they are going to trap particulate matter that may enter the eye. But even the eyelids, which we can also call them pupillary, what they do is that when they get close together, what happens, they're able to spread tears across the eyeball, so that it reduces dryness as far as the eyeball is concerned. Now remember that even before we look at that, let's look at some aspects which are very important as far as tears is concerned, because these tears that we are talking about will contain lysozymes. Yes, even apart from that, it will also contain immunoglobulin A as far as fighting infections are concerned, or pathogens that may enter the eye are concerned. Now these tears will be produced by these glands that you find here on the superior aspect of the lateral aspect of the eye, which are known as lacrimal glands or the tear glands. Now when they manufacture these tears, what happens is that tears will spread across the eyeball, and what happens is that they're able to enter some holes over here, superior and inferior lacrimal puncta, and then eventually get into what we call superior and inferior lacrimal canaliculi. Yes, so when they enter the canaliculi, what happens is that eventually they will drain into what we call the main excretory duct. Remember, it's an exocrine gland, so the main excretory duct will be the lacrimal duct, which will convey the secretion into what we call the lacrimal sac, which is located in the lacrimal fossa of the lacrimal bones. Now please visit one of the videos that I've done, as well as the skull osteology is concerned, so that you appreciate the bony orbit component, the bones that form the wall of this orbit, which will accommodate the eye. So that is that one. But remember that as one cries, what happens is they tend to find the runny nose happening as well. The reason is that when in the lacrimal fossa, the lacrimal sac will convey the secretion to the nasal cavity via the nasolacrimal duct. Alright, so let's look at this important aspect as far as this visual system is concerned, the eye. Now, so there is this important muscle which actually takes it's around the pupillary area, which elevates the superior eyelid, which we call it superior or levator pupillary superioris. So it's able to elevate the superior eyelid. Now sometimes if someone gets affected by some autoimmune disorder, such as myasthenia gravis, then it can result in ptosis, so that there will be lazy eyelids, so that yes, the eyelids, the muscles will become weak. So that is one important aspect which we have to understand. Now, if we talk about the tunics of the eye is actually made up of three main tunics. We have the outermost tunic, which is actually fibrous essentially. Then we have the innermost tunic, the middle tunic being the vascular tunic, and then we have the innermost, where the retina where we need it for vision, the sensory neural component of it. Now if we look at the eye, actually what happens is that we are going to find that the outermost tunic will consist of two components. It will consist of an anterior component, which we will call it the cornea. Now the cornea is actually made up of 5 layers, But before I talk about the cornea, what happens is that there's a layer, okay, which runs around the fibrous tunic, even as well as the pupil, the eyelash, and that's the conjunctiva. Now, if the conjunctiva, usually if you look at someone's eye, if you look at the white eye, you see some blood vessels around that area. That's where you find the conjunctiva. Now, sometimes if it's exposed to injurious agents, then it becomes inflamed, leading to conjunctivitis, and this conjunctivitis manifests clinically as pink eye. So therefore, we will have what you call the bulbar component, which will surround the bulb of the eye, as well as we will have also the palpebral component of this conjunctiva. Now, if you look at the cornea, it actually forms the anterior 1/6 of the outermost tunic, anterior 1/6, and actually will have 3 main layers, because it's an important component which is going to refract the light that is going to enter the eye. What happens is that it has what we call the oil layer, the mucous layer, and the water layer. So it's very important as far as refraction of light is concerned. So it's the most important refractile component of the eye. So that if the area is not smooth, lacking all these layers, then they have to be corrected. So that's the cornea. That's the cornea. So its refractive index, yes, is very important. Yes, even as far as even the lens, all those things are concerned, which we will look at. All right, so that's the anterior 1/6 of the eye. Consists of a thin membrane, usually made of 5 layers. It's translucent, so that light can pass through it. Yes, and then eventually you get to the others. Now, the other component which forms majority of the outermost tunic is this fibrous component. And this fibrous component is known as the sclera, which we often call it the white eye. Now, it's actually very tough, therefore inelastic as well, able to help maintain the shape of the eye as well as pressure within the eye, able to actually protect majority of component of the inner component of the eye. Now, if you look at it, what happens is that in addition, it also provides surfaces for some muscles, which you can see finding attachment here. Now, these muscles actually will have a common origin, which we call it common tendinous ring, or the annulus of Zinn, which will actually come and then attach on this white eye, or the sclera. Now, let's look at some of these component. But before we look at that, let's look at some bit of orientation. Now, there's the lateral aspect, which we are going to have this zygomatic bone. Then the medial part, we are going to have the maxillary bone. The other bones are out of sight. Now, what happens is that, yes, you are also going to have one other thing, is that for you to know your landmarks, whether being lateral or medial, even without these zygomatic or whatever bones, then you have to look at the superior aspect. There's a muscle over here which its fibers actually run medially. That's the superior rectus, which we'll come to. So we said that this is the lateral aspect, this is the medial aspect that we are seeing, so superiorly, and then inferior aspect. We are having this muscle, which we call that these muscles are known as extraocular muscles. But before we look at extraocular muscles, you have to also understand that we have intraocular muscles. Now, these intraocular muscles, yes, you can look at one of these. Yes, these are the ciliary muscles. Yes, upon contraction, you're able to alter, the shape of the lens, so that it's able to help, as far as accommodation is concerned, which we are going to look at. Yes, apart from that, we have the, dilator pupil as well as the sphincter pupil. Sphincter pupil is going to cause, constriction of, the pupil. That's in, meiosis, and then dilator pupil going to cause dilation of the pupil. During, sympathetic conditions, so that there will be that kind of, dilation of the pupil, dilatation of the pupil. That's mydriasis. So these extraocular muscles are going to actually alter the shape of the eyeball, so that the eyeball will be at one side or the other, depending on which muscles are contracted. Now this is the superior rectus muscle. Superior rectus muscle. Now remember that all these extraocular muscles will be supplied by the oculomotor nerve, which is the cranial nerve 3, except 2 of them, which I will come to. So this is the superior rectus muscle. So it will laterally, rotate the eyeball as well as, elevate the eyeball. So move the eyeball upwards. So remember that if you are having superior, rectus, then you're also going to have this one known as inferior rectus muscle. So remember the actions are going to be opposite. So the inferior rectus is going to be, laterally, rotate the eyeball as well as, move the eyeball inferiorly or downwards. Now the next one will be, of course, this is the lateral rectus muscle. The lateral rectus muscle. If it's lateral rectus muscle, then it's able to move the eye away from the nose. So we say it is an adductor of the eye. Now this lateral rectus is actually going to be supplied, by what we call the abducens nerve, which is the cranial nerve 6. So because an adductor, so abducens nerve is going to supply it. So that is the muscle. So on the other hand, opposite to it, medially, we're also going to have what we call the medial rectus muscle. So by way of function being opposite, the medial rectus is going to adduct, bring the eyeball closer to the nose, adduct the eyeball. Its name is it's going to be an adductor, and actually yes, it's having what we call a point. This medial, this is the medial rectus. So it's also going to be supplied by the cranial nerve 3, which is the oculomotor nerve. So medially, so adducts the eye, so closer to the nose. Now the next muscles that we are going to see will be the oblique muscles. So we are going to have what we call the inferior oblique muscle. So if you can see this muscle, which is running obliquely, inferiorly, this is the inferior oblique muscle. Now this inferior oblique muscle, what it does is that it medially rotates the eyeball as well as, and superiorly and upwards, raises it superiorly. So medially rotates and elevates, the eyeball. See the way it runs. And then the other one is this one here, which is known as the superior oblique muscle. And the superior oblique muscle, apart from medially rotating the eyeball, what it does is that it depresses it as well. So it moves the eyeball downwards as well. Yes, this one is actually supplied by what we call the trochlear nerve, because it's actually having attachment to trochlear, which serves as an anatomical pulley, so that it can help in its action of medially rotating it and inferiorly rotating the eyeball. So that is that one, and the trochlear is cranial nerve 4. So these are the extraocular muscles, which of course the fibrous tunic, which is a sclera, is going to provide surfaces for attachment. Well, apart from this, what happens is that we go to what we call the vascular tunic. Now if you take out this, yes, we are going to have what we call the vascular tunic. Now remember that the vascular tunic, right, is going to be pigmented. So this area, this broad area that you can see here, is the choroid. Now remember that the choroid, yes, because it's having blood vessels, say the vascular tunic is going to nourish the other components of the cell. But in addition, it has a dark region which is going to help absorb excess light, which didn't focus onto the retina, so that you minimize the disturbance as far as vision is concerned. This therefore prevents what we call total internal reflection of light. Now, in addition, we have what we call the iris as well. Iris is also a component, this dark pigmented component, that's the iris, which will actually contain what we call a ciliary body. So there will be ciliary body over here. This ciliary body will have internally, if I turn it this way, we are going to have, yes, ciliary muscles as well as what we call ciliary processes. Now, importantly, is the ciliary process. This ciliary process, the epithelial line of the ciliary process, is going to secrete what we call aqueous humor. Now, this aqueous humor will be produced constantly, and they have to be drained. If not so, then glaucoma can develop, increasing, the intraocular pressure, and it can actually press on the optic nerves, and which may lead to blindness. So that is that one that we find. Now remember that this ciliary, body will also have what we call suspensive ligaments, which are going to help suspend, the lens. But remember that the ciliary, muscles, upon contraction, will actually press on what we call the lens, this crystalline structure. The lens, we press on it, it becomes more convex, it's more convex, it becomes more convex. But upon relaxation, then it becomes, yes, less convex, it becomes thin or less fat. So during what we call far vision, then what will happen is that the lens, will become less, it will become less fat or less thin, or become thinner, so to speak. So that, because, the ciliary muscles are not contracting, But during near vision, then what happens is that the ciliary muscles will have to contract powerfully so that you can, help in vision as far as accommodation is concerned. And that happens, the crystalline lens becomes fat. Now, sometimes what happens is that this crystalline lens, which, what happens is that, yes, at old age, it becomes less, less malleable, so that even upon contraction realization, nothing really happens. And that condition is what we call presbyopia. And of course, in such a case, then contact lenses will have to be in place. You have to get those ones. All right, now, so we find that when you talk about the vascular tunic, apart from the choroid, we're also going to have what we call the iris. And the iris, there will be this aperture, which will be controlled by, the ciliary muscles. Yes, this aperture will be there, and that is the pupil of the eye. So that during parasympathetic conditions, yes, the pupil will get constricted, in situations where you have a lot of light around, then it gets constricted. But during dark conditions where the sympathetic system overtakes the parasympathetic, then what happens is that the pupil have to dilate to accommodate more light in there. Now, apart from this, so we've seen the iris, the choroid, yes, we've even seen the lens. Remember that the lens is biconvex, it's convex in nature on either side. Now, in situations where accommodation cannot really occur powerfully enough, and people suffering from what you call hypermetropia, that's long-sightedness, and therefore they can see far vision, but they are not able to see objects which are very close to them. In such a case, then it means that there is that kind of the images are converging earlier before it gets to the retina, which we'll come to. In such a situation, then you have to give them what we call divergent lenses. There are some other individuals who suffer from what we call short-sightedness, or what we call so we have myopia. So myopic individuals, then it means that what happens is that they're able to see near objects, but far object they are not able to see it. So far object, what happens is that it forms, before what we call it, the the retina, so you have to get them divergent lenses. Then for long-sightedness, they need convergent lenses, because what happens is that it forms behind the retina. Now, which we'll get to pretty soon. Now, for the next thing that we have to understand is that, having talked about what we call, the aqueous humor, the aqueous humor contains a lot of nutrients. Yes, ascorbic acid, glucose, and what have you. Yes, it's very important. Yes, as far as even it also serves as a refractive material. The lens also refracts light. Now, this aqueous humor, it's actually filled within area which we call it the anterior chamber of the eye. Now, in the anterior chamber of the eye, yes, the anterior chamber can therefore be described as, from the area where we have the lens, okay, the area where we have the lens, all the way to the cornea. But even with the anterior chamber of the eye, we can also further divide it into two. The posterior part of the anterior chamber, where it's actually formed between, the external aspects of the lens up to the internal aspect of the iris. And then from the iris to the cornea, we are also going to have the anterior aspect of the anterior chamber of the eye. Now, having seen these ones, then what happens is that, yes, the next important thing is, the posterior chamber. Now, the posterior chamber is filled by this important fluid, which is jelly-like actually, and it's very, more viscous. Therefore, sometimes we call it the vitreous body, or we call it the vitreous humor. Now, this vitreous humor is formed during intrauterine life only, and without it, you are not going to. Yes, it helps also with refracting light. It helps also maintain, shape of the eye. Yes, maintaining even intraocular pressure is very important. So without this one, if you don't develop some in, fetal life, then it means you can't have it. You can't have it, and actually produced by specific retinal cells. Now, the next important thing that we want to talk about is, the retina aspect. Now, moving away from here, now you can see this whole area represents, the ciliary body, but you can see there is this serrated area, like tooth-like, projections, and it's known as ora serrata. Now, of course, this area becomes what we call the retina. So we have the retina, and this retina will actually contain a lot of, rods around this area. Peripherally, we are going to have rods, but around this area, if you can see, around this area, we are going to have this yellowish area, which you see over here. We are going to have what you call that the area of fovea centralis, and within it we have the macula lutea. This area is actually concentrated with a lot of cones, and remember that cones is for color vision, and rods is for black and white or even gray vision. So that's very important. And of course, we are going to have, the superior and inferior temporal arches also being here, and that is what we have. Now, of course, we are going to also have this optic disc around here, and emerging out of this area will be the optic nerve. So the fibers, yes, which are going to make, will have the optic nerve. Now, remember that the left and right optic nerves will meet at the level of the optic chiasma, and there will be that kind of depreciation happening. Now, remember that these kind of images will be concentrated, taken into the occipital lobe of the brain for interpretation. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a quick tutorial regarding, the eye, and I hope it's going to be helpful to you in your studies. Thank you very much for your audience.